You're not a woman, you don't look like a woman, you don't act like a woman.
Assaults that LGBT people live with on a daily basis. Employment discrimination, discrimination in education, discrimination in healthcare access and public accommodations. And when people have to confront these things on a daily basis, it can make life more difficult.
Trans women are women!
Is that even though all these laws are being introduced in countries around the world, there's no collection of data about how women may be being impacted.
The suggestion seems to be that a man, a sexually predatory man, would dress as a woman with the sole intention to gain access to a woman's
If you
refuge.
were a predatory man, why wouldn't you actually try to do that?
LGBT activists saying that the term lesbian is old-fashioned and problematic, to those same people saying that lesbians should like dicks.
Ariel, mate, lesbians don't have penises.
Well, J.K. Rowling has been tweeting derogatory comments about trans people for some months.
And you have explicitly excluded trans women from your definition of women.
Absolutely, of course I exclude trans women for the definition of women.
Blame the girls, because they pretty much ruin everything.
Excuse me, it's ma'am. It is ma'am.
Is a biologically male swimmer who's mopping up in the female division. This is a trans female, so he was born.
So in the last decade, there's been a sudden explosion in teenage girls identifying as transgender.
Be a boy and now I'm a girl. I would say that I have a girl brain and a boy body, and I think like a girl, but I just have a boy body, and it's different than you.
Stigma against MAPS is a problem in part because it makes MAPS think that they're monsters. That's really problematic in terms of MAP well-being. It's really hard to cope when you think you're a terrible person because you have attractions that you can't change. Have advocated for use of the term MAP. They've advocated for it primarily because it's less stigmatizing than other terms like pedophile.
This is the genderbread person. The genderbread person is what's being shown to children in schools to teach them about gender identity. Now, gender identity is not the same as sexual orientation, biological sex, or gender expression, which is the way you present yourself, the clothes you wear, your hair, all the rest of it. Now, this video is not made to offend anybody or to discriminate against anybody. I've made a video where I have used facts, my findings, and I have made conclusions based on those findings. Now, upon seeing the genderbread person, I have discovered that, I thought I was a woman because I had female reproductive organs. The genderbread person tells me that that's different, that there's a gender identity. Now, for somebody who's never felt like a woman, I felt like a woman, I feel like myself. I've never felt like a woman, I've never felt like a man. So I've concluded that I myself am genderqueer, also known as non-binary.
How she got that way will never be known. Some say a jealous lover. Others, that it was the code of the freaks. Believe it or not, there she is.
So we're going to start with the word. I always thought the word gender, gender, what's your gender? It was always, to me, interchangeable with sex, It was just another word, maybe a more polite word. So where did this word come from? When did this word start being used to mean, boy or girl, man or woman? So we come to, start with, in fact, a man called John Money. John Money was born in New Zealand in 1921 and he died in 2006. However, most of his work was done in the USA. He was a sexologist. He was a trained psychologist, became a sexologist. And he is considered, if you like, the founding or one of the founding fathers of transgenderism, right? He coined the term gender during his extensive works with people with intersex conditions. There's one very prominent case, which I'm going to go on to talk about, which included twins, where one was a biological male raised as a girl and one was biological male raised as a boy. And we're going to go on to talk more about that. But the word gender. Before John Money coined this term gender, it had only ever been used in terms of linguistics. And by that I mean in countries like, say, Italy and Spain, where they have masculine and feminine words. You know, they have the masculine word, the feminine word, and most of their sort of grammar is broken down into masculine and feminine. We don't have that in English. Well, we do to a tiny bit, but that's how it was used. Before then, nobody ever used gender to talk about humans until John Money. Now, John Money's whole thing was gender is a social construct. And his thing was that we know that I know I'm a woman because when I was growing up, I was treated as a girl. I was given, you know, feminine toys. I was perhaps treated more sensitively than a boy would have done. If I cried, no one was going to stop crying. You know, people were perhaps a bit more sensitive towards me. I was raised differently. And as a consequence of that, I have grown up and I'm now a woman. And that's why. If you're a boy and you grow into a man, likewise, you're treated as a boy. You're given toy guns. Go outside and play. Don't cry. That's not very, that's for girls. And as a consequence, they grow into men. And it was very much a nurture situation. This was very much society treating you a certain way. And because society treats you that certain way, you become a man or you become a woman. And that's it. That was his thing. And he really believed that. So he never said that gender was something that was a personal thing. He never said anything like that. It was always something that other people put on you, that the rest of society. And that's where we get gender being a social construct, because it was everybody else that put it on you, right? You got your gender, or your gender identity came from everybody else. Now, before I go into more detail about John Money, and I'm going to talk all about what he did, how it turned out, and how it all ended. But in order to get there, we need to go back even further. And before we go back even further, we need to talk about queer theory. Because queer theory and transgenderism is very much intertwined, very much. And we see the Q. We get the L, the G, the B, and the Q. The Q means queer. The Q means queer. It can also mean questioning, but it's understood to mean queer, right? Now, the Q enters the rainbow in 2015. So what is queer? What is it? Because before I looked into this, if you just said queer to me, I'd have thought, well, just gay stuff. Just gay stuff. Nothing that particularly interests me. It's just gay stuff. You know, what's a queer person? Well, to me, I always thought queer was a slur for gay people. You know, oh, you're queer. That's how when I was growing up. But since then, it's been reclaimed. It's been reclaimed by the rainbow. And it now has a theory all of its own. Now, it's important at this point to bring Judith Butler into this. Now, Judith Butler, she's still alive. She still works. And she very much is one of the pioneers of queer theory. Queer theory, essentially, is challenging social, sexual norms, right? So we go back to the kind of sort of 60s, before sexual revolution. Before homosexuality was acceptable, if you like, before it was no longer a taboo, and we say, well, okay, queer theory, we challenge that. We challenge society's perception of homosexuality. We have a conversation about it. Well, let's talk about what this is. Let's bring it into the open and discuss why it's a taboo. Like, well, so we bring it into the open, and we say, well, yeah, we put it in front of everyone, whether they like it or not. We're going to place it in front of them, and we're going to say, look, this is all this is. This is just a man who wants to have sex with another man. It's just a woman who wants to have sex with another woman. So what's the problem? And over the course, we have an entire gay liberation movement, and in fact, we come to 2022, gay marriage is now legal. Most of Western society, bar perhaps some hardcore religious people, the majority of Western society doesn't have a problem with it. Okay, well, it's just adults having sex with one another, to the point where it's no longer a taboo. You can openly walk down the street holding hands with somebody same sex. You can marry them. You can adopt children. It's fine. No one's bothered. No one's bothered. So we continue on. Well, we still have queer theory, and you think, well, you'd think to yourself, wouldn't you? Or I think to myself, well, the war's won, the battle's won, isn't it? Why in 2015 does the Q enter the rainbow? We've got gay, we've got lesbian, we've got bisexual. Isn't it covered? It's covered, isn't it? It's covered in the rainbow now. We've got the T, which is, transsexual. Now it's transgender. Q. Well, even the gender queer, because that's covered in the T, isn't it? The genderiness, isn't it? So why the Q? That's what I'm questioning. Why the Q? Well, this is because queer theory doesn't just end with this. We've got to constantly challenge society's perception of what is acceptable and what isn't acceptable. Now we've got there. The battle has been won. The battle has been won with homosexuality. It's been won. We all accept it now because we all had a conversation about it. Society was confronted and society said, that's fine. Problem, not a problem. This is where it gets a bit darker. And this is where I'm going to move on. Because we need to look at people who Judith references in her works. And one of her most favourite people to reference in her works is a man who went by the name of Michel Foucault. I'm probably mispronouncing that. It's a French name. So ignorantly mispronouncing that, I'm quite certain. He's died now. He died of AIDS, age 57, in 1984. The problem with him was largely in his beliefs and his lifestyle. Now, this guy was a philosopher. They love him in France, apparently. They love him. Judith likes him. Judith can't get enough of this guy. Now I'm going into describing him because you'll see where this goes. So, Michel was a big, listen, I'm going to say at this point he was gay, and then we're going to go on to say he wasn't at a later point, and you'll understand why. He was, very much, fight for the cause. There's only one problem. He wanted to abolish all age consent laws in France. He, along with several others, but we're going to focus on this guy because, just to go through all that is another video in itself. We need to keep this relevant. He campaigned to abolish age of consent laws like crazy. He believed there was no problem with paedophilia. No problem. Children might like it. Children do like it. They like it. Just wanted to quickly add in a couple of excerpts from his book. Now, you can go through this whole book, and I'm going to put the link for you underneath. This is his life's work, these books. There's several volumes. I mean, I've just looked at volume 1. Now, you can go on the link, and you just go on the find button, and you type in children, and you see the utter lunacy he's coming out with about children. I mean, these guys believe, this guy in particular believes that children are sexual. The only reason that they are no longer sexual is a combination of the church, capitalism, and society saying it's wrong. And the only reason that children are troubled by sex abuse is because society has deemed it wrong. And this is the social construct fact of it, built up over many years for its own reasons, capitalism's reasons, the church's reasons, and now it's a stain on society. And we need to break down this construct of seeing child sex or child sexuality as a problem. And this is what he argues throughout his book, throughout his whole book. And I mean, people like Judith, they love it. They've read them all. Judith's read all this lot. She's read it all, and he argues it in such a way to make it seem so logical and so believable. And it's bloody frightening. It's bloody frightening. Just look for yourself. He himself was a paedophile, and that's where I changed from saying he was gay to he was a paedophile, because a gay person is a man who sleeps with other men. A paedophile is a adult who sleeps with children. And the two are not the same, right? You cannot be a gay paedophile. You are just a paedophile. Paedophiles are their own people. Paedophiles are their own people, right? Like saying a heterosexual people. No, they're their own people. He was a paedophile. He, as I said, he campaigned tirelessly to abolish age of consent laws. He lived in Tunisia for many years, where he would pay. And his whole thing was that the consent is, he believed that if a child took money for it, then they were consenting, definitely, they want it. He would pay young Tunisian boys to have sex with him, to be raped by him, essentially. They would go to gravestones, wherever, and he would rape them, and he would then pay them. I mean, we're talking about, impoverished kids in Tunisia who were desperate for money, desperate to, you get the idea. And he raped them. So, there was no, I'm a rich guy from the West, have some money to feed your family. There's no. He could have just given them the money, by the way. He had the money. He didn't have to have sex with them. He had the money anyway, if he cared about these kids. But no, because people like him, and he is a monster. Monsters like him, he was a monster. They don't actually care about children. They don't. Paedophile. They have a problem with this word now, paedophile. They want to be called minor attracted people. I also have a problem with the word paedophile because paedophile essentially means child lover. They don't love children. They want to abuse children. If they loved children, he would want those children to be okay, and he would give those children money. He wouldn't give them money on the condition that they allowed themselves to be raped by him. Anyway, so this was Michelle. This was Michelle Foucault. Now again, Judith, she references this guy. Now to me, you're entitled to have your queer theory and you write your essays and all the rest of it. Why you would consistently quote and revere a raving paedophile who raped children is a mystery to me. But she does. She does. And you can listen, I can put 1,000 links there. Michelle Foucault was pretty notorious. Judith isn't, no problem. She's not disgusted by him enough to not include him in her works. So he's in there. This is all relevant. It's all relevant. We're going to get there. It's all freaking relevant. Now we go to the next person in line. We're coming back to John Money. Don't worry, we are coming back to him. We go to the next person in line. Now, I don't want to talk about this person badly because I can't find any evidence that this person was a paedophile, but it's very important to mention him because of his connection to the next person, who is more connected. This is a web, if you can imagine. It's a web of these men, of course, apart from Judith. Judith is a woman, but it's a web. So I want to come to the next person that's very important to mention in this entire thing. Briefly, because I'm not going to say he's a lunatic. He was a sexologist, and his name was Harry Benjamin. Important name, because this guy did a lot of work with transsexual people in the 40s, 50s. A lot of work, and I can't find any evidence that to anyone who doesn't believe that children should be, of course you'll say, well, that's wrong. Harry Benjamin began working with transsexual people, with people with gender identity disorder, also late 40s. He died in 1986. He was 101 years old. He had a good innings. He was introduced to his first patient with gender identity disorder by a man who's part of this web, who I'm going to go on to next, called Alfred Kinsey. They were sexologists at the time. Alfred Kinsey had been made aware of this individual as child through his work on a book, Sexual Behaviour of the Human Male. Put him in touch with Harry Benjamin. Said, you might be interested in speaking to this child. This child. Now you're going to probably go on to understanding why this child might have felt like he did not want to be who he was anymore when we go on to talking about Alfred Kinsey. But anyway, this child came through to him, and this child did not want to be a boy, believed he was a girl. So Harry Benjamin put him on estrogen. We'll try this out. This might help. You feel the way you feel. This really might help. Put him on estrogen and helped arrange for he and his mother to travel to Germany to get surgery, reassignment surgery. Shortly after that, they lost touch, and that was much to the dismay of Harry Benjamin, because of course he couldn't follow up on this. However, he still went on to treat many, 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 many more people with this gender identity disorder, trapped in the wrong body. And I mean, he puts an entire scale together of the levels at which this disorder can manifest itself. And you go from the top, feeling like transvestite, and he goes all the way down to the ones that want to cut everything off. They're so dysphoric about themselves, So we need to go to that next person who was mentioned. Trust the process. Because this guy, Alfred Kinsey, founding father of the sexual revolution, right? Now, Alfred Kinsey ties in with John Money. I mean, these guys tied in with one another completely. I mean, the Alfred Kinsey, they have an institute, and this guy... You get the John Money Fellowship. The pair are completely knitted. So Alfred Kinsey, born in New Jersey, USA. Alfred Kinsey was... I don't know what sexuality I would describe him as. He just wanted to sleep with everyone. Everyone. There was no... I mean, people describe this guy as a complete nutter. He's a complete and utter nutter, right? He circumcised himself with a pocket knife. He encouraged his staff to have orgies. I mean... Now this here is the Kinsey scale. This is Alfred Kinsey's idea of human sexuality. Human and we'll go on. It's all human sexuality falls into this Kinsey scale. Now this Kinsey scale is a big reference point for queer theory, a massive reference point for queer theory. And at this point, I really can't stress enough how important these people, Kinsey, one of them, particularly, was and is to queer theory. It's really, really important that people realise just how important this guy is to the whole thing. He wrote a book. He wrote 2 books. The first book he wrote, he wrote loads of books, listen, but the first book that put him on the map, right, was called Sexual Behaviour in the Human Male. Right. sexual behaviour in the human male, where Alfred Kinsey goes through and talks about, everyone can, men can have sex, But he has a chapter in his book where he claims that children, he argues, are sexual from the day they're born. From the day they are born. So how did he come up with this? How did he formulate an argument for this? Because to me, we've kind of done the experiment for hundreds and hundreds of years. Now we know that if you raise a child in a healthy environment where you do not expose them to sex or sexual acts, that isn't going to occur to that kid. Nothing is going to occur to that child. It didn't occur to them that there's anything else. And it begins to occur to everyone at the point of puberty, when you begin, the female starts ovulating, and sort of around mid-cycle, when she's as fertile as ever, yep, sexual feelings. This is part of evolution. Boys at the part of puberty, when they begin to create sperm, they begin to get a sex drive. Their testosterone starts and their sex drive develops. This is when a child will naturally begin to feel sexual and get sexual thoughts, even if they don't understand it. It's the feeling, and eventually they will go on to conflate it with either same-sex people or opposite-sex people. And we know where it goes. And this is, listen, we have, again, the experiment has happened where you don't have to even tell people what to do. And you get decades, hundreds of years in very strong Catholic countries like Ireland, where they had no idea what they were supposed to do, but they figure it out. They worked it out. And we have people, my great-grandmother included, who had 24 pregnancies, would not have known a thing until she figured it out herself. Man and woman get together, work it out. Now, of course, that's unreasonable in today's day and age. We know that kids are going to be exposed to this. We know that kids don't wait till they're married. So we need to expose them to some level at the appropriate time in order to teach them about contraception. Listen, you're going to get these thoughts, right? You're going to want to do stuff. If you do, just make sure, this doesn't happen, or you protect, because you're going to get pregnant otherwise. And this is the thing. So I get it. Listen, I'm not saying that we shouldn't have that. I'm just saying that we do not need to ever tell another human being about this, about sex, about anything, because eventually they'll work it out for themselves. That will just happen. So you certainly don't need to tell a child. Why would you need to tell a child? Well, Alfred Kinsey disagreed. And he was going to prove it. So what Alfred Kinsey did was he went round prisons, and he went round all of the parts of society with the most grotesque people, and he found the most grotesque people he possibly could. He found paedophiles from around the world, and he found one particular paedophile, who they referred to as Mr. Green. This utter piece of human excretion. Utter. And I don't even want to call this person a piece of shit, because I think that would be a compliment to that person. I think that shit is better than this person. Shit is better than this person. There is nothing of this world that I could call this person to do justice to just quite how much of a grotesque individual he was. And I don't know how he got access to his victims. However, he was enlisted by Alfred Kinsey. Alfred Kinsey enlisted this guy. This guy was taught how to set his findings, how to set his experiments out in ways in which Alfred Kinsey would find cohesive, and the ways in which Alfred Kinsey could lay out as evidence for the readers of his book. King abused hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of children. Right? Hundreds. And it's too horrifying to go into any kind of detail on here. It's too horrifying. There is a YouTube video which I will put in the comments where they go through all this. It's just too horrifying. But I will say the youngest was 2 months old into teenagers. Little children who he would rape. Boys initially for Alfred's sexuality of the human male, which he would rape. And he would, you know, manually rape. And he would time how long it took for these children to reach orgasm. He would laid it all out for Alfred Kinsey, how long it took for these children to achieve orgasm. One little boy was abused by this man over a 24-hour period, one little tiny boy. So it was all Alfred Kinsey. Brilliant, brilliant, brilliant Rex. Anyway, he did his book, Sexuality of the Human Female. Same story. He would enlist fathers who were sexually abusing their daughters as well. And there's one victim, again, that you'll see on that video, who was brutally abused by her father, who would stand with he'd been taught how to lay his data out, stand with a stopwatch. And he would time how long it took how long it would take for her to reach orgasm. Anyone think that was even a thing that could ever happen? He goes through his data and he talks about what these paedophiles describe as orgasms. Again, I'm not going to go through it on here because it's just too distressing. Essentially, the children's responses to this trauma, which would, as you can imagine, which was them crying, and was recorded as they're having orgasms. And remember, this is down to a 2-month-old little baby, you know, that was being sexually abused by paedophiles. And Alfred Kinsey took all this data, laid it out in his books as evidence, fact. Children are sexual. They like it. They love it. They have orgasms. See? Proved it. Proof. They love it. Now that's relevant. That's really, really relevant. Because it's difficult to convey, and I do not want to conflate the two, because and this is why I wasn't prepared to say Michel Foucault was a gay man. Because to me, there are paedophiles and there are not paedophiles. And not paedophiles can like men, or they can like women, or they can like both, right? There's a separation. And then there are paedophiles. And paedophiles like children. That's it. Some paedophiles will sleep with anything, but essentially a paedophile sleeps with children. They enjoy it. They don't love them. We've got this. Again, it annoys me, the word paedophile. It all annoys me because a child lover. They don't love children. They love themselves. They want to hurt children. They don't want anything. What? I love children. They don't. There is no love involved. They want to use them. They want to use them for their own sexual gratification. And in order to do so, they want to prove that children like it. Now, what's important to remember at the time, these sexologists who are responsible for the sexual revolution, right? At this point, I do want to point out some more names. Now, I haven't got all the time in the world. None of us have, because honestly, we could just go on for hours about these people. But do you remember that signatories list, and this was all the people who were trying to abolish the age of consent laws in France. Well, if you look closely, you can find, I mean, all of them are scumbags, aren't they? But if you look up here, you'll see a Hijacking Derrida. Now I'm mispronouncing that. It's a French name, and I know I'm mispronouncing it. He is another very, very, very prominent person in queer theory. We go past Michel Foucault there, Michel Foucault, apologies, and we see another one, Guy Hockenheim, another person, very, very prominent in this sexual revolution, this whole queer thing. And we see these names over and over again. Their work's been referenced, and I think, why? How are these people regarded so highly, in something that people are using? I mean, the 2015 that Q was added, and these people were the foundations of it. Their works are the foundations of this queer theory. And we come back to queer theory, because remember, queer theory is all about challenging norms. Now, we could even go back to heterosexual norms, because back in those days, it was, sleeping with lots of people, that's, you get married, we sleep with one person, and you don't sleep with more than one person, and certainly homosexuality, certainly wrong, lesbians, certainly wrong, all wrong, man and woman, one woman, the end. So it was very much about challenging this. But at the same time, we see in these works, these arguments being made to justify paedophilia. So these people, not all by the way, but these ones mentioned, and it's important because Judith references these people in her works, right? Why? Why are you referencing paedophiles, paedophile enablers? Why? Alfred Kinsey never reported Rex King to the police, never, ever, ever. And he went on for another 10 years to continue abusing children for his own gratification. Right? Alfred Kinsey knew he was doing that, not bothered. Because Alfred Kinsey was making the argument that children enjoyed it. He believed children enjoyed it. Now, there's no evidence to suggest that Alfred Kinsey himself slept with children, but you didn't think it was anything wrong with it. So as these people were arguing for the liberation of sex with everyone, men and men, women, women, heterosexual people can just, whatever. The arguments were also being made for sex with children, right? And this is important because it was risen to the surface around this time. And society has a conversation. We are confronted with this. And at this time, and this is the 60s, because it's important to understand how this keeps on being raised. I say, hold on a second, okay. At this point in time, we're still not okay with gay people. We're, okay, you're quite right, heterosexual people, though, yeah, we should be able to have sex with everyone. I mean, I hear there's a pill that women can take to stop them getting pregnant, so those fears gone. So what we'll do is we'll say do you know what, if you're a man and a woman, just have sex with whoever, have sex with loads of people. We're not gonna, say you're a bad person, but still we're not really happy about, we're still not quite happy about gay people yet, but we're getting there. So this is the 60s, right? We talked about the paedophiles, and still society, that ain't right. So the paedophilia goes back down again. But the gay people carry on. Well, wait, they haven't given us they haven't said definitely no to us. There's obviously, but we're still going to go because what we're doing is okay. And we move forward, right? Because it's really important to understand. And I mean, we're going to move away a bit. I want to, there is a bigger picture here, which I'm trying to show you guys, right? We move into the 80s. And we get a reemergence. Because gay liberation really comes to the forefront in the 80s. So it's the gay sexual liberation kind of happens in the 80s. What happened for heterosexual people in the 60s is going to happen for the gay people, the lesbians in the 80s, right? And of course, we see it's okay. We come to the end of it. There's gay liberation. It happens. Now, I'm not going to, we know it happened. There's no point in me unravelling this at this point. But what I will say is, again, as the gay people began to, we want to be liberated, much like in the 60s, uprised the paedophiles. And the paedophiles had another look round and said, well, maybe now is our time. It might be time for us now. Look, okay, in the 60s was a bit, because their society is saying that it's okay to be gay. Can you believe it? Can you believe it? Yeah, saying it's okay for gay people. Like, saying gay people should be allowed to, it's our time now too. And we see them rise up again.
Adults would feel that a developed consideration for children would involve leaving children alone sexually to find their own way for themselves with their own peer groups and not with adults.
Yes, I would be all in favour of children finding their own way sexually, but I think also that adults have a part to play, because children are one part of the whole society. It isn't the society where we separate children from adults.
What do you feel?
I feel that PI is not a procurement agency for children, never has been and never will be. Our political objectives include developing a society where children are given a much higher status than today, where they are recognised as individuals in their own right, and this includes recognising their right to certain sexual freedoms whilst protecting them from the kind of criminal assaults which took place in Brighton.
But surely it's a question of recognising children's maturity, and how can you have an equal relationship, which is what I take a mature sexual relationship to be, between an adult and a child who is not mature in body, in mind, or personal awareness? It has to be unequal.
I don't accept that this concept of maturity at all. Adults, for instance, aren't necessarily mature. It's a long process.
Well, I take it for granted that no adult is probably ever mature, but nevertheless, my state of maturity, or your state of maturity, is clearly different from that of a child of 12. How can there be an equal relationship which allows of sex, which is usually a shocking experience for everybody at some time or another? How can you allow of an equal relationship between two people so unequally positioned at the starting off point?
I don't accept that sex is a spontaneously shocking experience.
But I'm saying, at some stage or other, there is an element of shocking sex.
Not if children are properly educated about sex, and it's an obligation on society to see that children are given a far more comprehensive sexual education from a far earlier age.
But in that case, they find it out, they discover this with people of their own age and in their own time. And it is the question of inequality, which I come back to, which I think you have an answer.
Indeed, by your lights, the relationship is unequal in the same way that a teacher-child relationship is unequal, in the same way that a parent-child relationship is unequal.
The teacher's not exploiting the child sexually.
And nor is a pedophile. Pedophiles do not exploit children. Child
Pedophiles
molesters
are using the child's sexuality.
No, pedophiles do not use a child's sexuality. Pedophiles develop a mutual sexuality with the child. It's an entirely reciprocal relationship.
But you can't say that because of this business of immaturity and the inequality of the relationship.
Yes, but the definition of maturity is yours. We don't share it.
Well, what is your definition of maturity in this context? So how can a child of 12 make a mature judgment about something like sex for the first time, which it has not the first idea about, and cannot possibly weigh the consequences of it?
You're imputing to a sexual relationship heavy judgmental issues which
I'm talking about the physical and psychical response.
Yes. A child is able to recognise a pleasurable experience. He is able to recognise a pleasing emotional experience. He is able to express consent and to recognise that this is something he wishes to continue. And a responsible, caring paedophile it always refers to the wishes of the child.
Now that was a clip from PI, Pedophile Information Exchange. Right? Because this was, now obviously paedophiles never went away. They didn't go away in the 60s. They've been going. And we know that if you, particularly, and I'll put the link, if you Watch a gentleman called John Wedger, who is ex-Scotland Yard, ex-Met Police, who worked on paedophile task forces. On his channel, the care homes throughout all these decades was rife with paedophilia. I mean, these were kids that no one was looking out for, and they were being abused left, right and centre. So we know it never ever went away. However, the paedophiles decided, well, let's have another go. Let's have another go at convincing society that we are acceptable. They're letting the gays in, and maybe it's our time. And this is why we see, people openly admitting that they're paedophiles. And we also see people in politics beginning to, because remember, politicians only care about votes. They don't really give a shit about anything else. They want to get in power, and they will go along with whatever they think they need to go along with in order to get there or keep their power. Now, the reason that I wanted to show you that video with those two paedophiles is because the one paedophile, he worked in the Home Office. He actually worked in the Home Office at one point, and he used Home Office equipment to make his paedophile information exchange media. He worked there, right? And then we see this group enters into an organisation which was being run by Harriet Harman at the time, right? National Council for Civil Liberties. Now, Harriet has been challenged about this, and I had no idea. These people were speaking at events. Right? Other people in this organisation resigned because these paedophiles were being allowed to speak at events. Right? They were allowed into this organisation. This is a mainstream government organisation, right? Run by Harriet Harman. And they were allowed in. This was happening, this was the 80s. This was sort of 70s, But this is what I'm saying. They're constantly there. Coming up to the surface. They're always there. The paedophiles are always there. But they are waiting for acceptance. And this is this is my opinion, and I have come to this opinion on looking back at this kind of years of seeing them popping up and popping down, right? Why is this relevant now? Well, the reason why it's relevant now is because I look at this. I sit here, right, and I look at this. I say, right, got the L, got the G, the B, got the T. 2015, we've got the Q. Why 2015 do we have the Q? Well, 2014-15 was a real tipping point for the transgender movement. Now, before you start, I am not conflating transgenderism with paedophilia. I don't believe that people who are transgender, of which I am now one, I'm non-binary, and I certainly don't have those feelings, are paedophiles. I don't believe paedophiles are transgender. What I do believe, however, is like the rights movement of the 60s, sexual liberation of heterosexual people. They tried, didn't they, the paedophiles? Well, maybe it's our time. Like we see with the gay liberation, again, up they come. Is it our time? And I believe now we are seeing with this transgender liberation movement, transgender, up they're popping. Up they are popping. Again. Up they're popping again. But there's one very concerning difference this time. One very, very, very concerning difference this time. They are forming arguments. They are forming arguments that they were not able to form before because of the way society is deeming how transgenderism has evolved. Right? So before I get there, we're going to go back to John Money. We're going to go back to John Money because he's the king of transgender. He's the guy that coined the term gender. He decided what it meant. And we're going to talk about what he did. Now, we can't talk about John Money without talking about his experiments, right? And by that, I'm going to tell you about his most famous experiment, which was on two little boys. 1965, two little boys born, Bruce and Brian Reimer. At the age of 2 months old, their mother believed they had a disorder where they would need to, they were diagnosed with a disorder where circumcision was the cure. Took the little boys in to be circumcised. A malfunction on the machine saw them cutting Bruce's penis off. Gone. Bloody hell. Didn't know what to do. They didn't get Brian circumcised, obviously, and his disorder resolved itself. Didn't need it in the end. However, they've got a little boy without a penis. So, they were watching television one day and they saw John Money come on, and John Money had his transsexual theories, and they thought, let's get in touch with this guy. Maybe this guy can help us. Maybe this guy knows. Maybe this guy will have a solution. So they didn't know what to do. Can you imagine? You've got a baby with he's in cut off. He's got the other parts. I mean, not no penis though. So they got in touch with John Money, and John Money was very, very happy. And John Money said to them, I have an idea.
He has an idea. It just popped into my head. I have an idea. He has an idea. Do you want to hear my idea? What an idea. I hope it's a good one. Let's hear your idea. I have an idea. She has an idea. It just popped into my head. I have an idea. She has an idea. Do you want to hear my idea? Hope it's a good one. Let's hear your idea.
So, his idea was, we're just going to turn him into a girl. Just turn him into a girl. Because I think that girls are made. Girls aren't born, they're made. If we all tell Bruce he is a girl, well, he'll believe it. Like, he'll believe it. Stick him in a dress. That's all there is to it. Stick him in a dress. Give him some dolls. We'll give him a girl's name. Let's call him Brenda. They called him Brenda. Let's call him Brenda. It's a girl's name, not a girly name, isn't it? And he will grow up, and he will believe that he's a woman. Because everyone's told him this. It's hot. I mean, these little boys were 2 at the time. So, I mean, he'd been living till 2. And I've got, 2 that been dressed like a little boy all this time, And this was not this was a normal little boy. This wasn't, and I say normal because we know that a majority of boys will conform to male stereotypes, and we know that a majority of little girls will conform to female stereotypes, and we all kind of have our own ideas about what those stereotypes are. I mean, people probably see that and they're like, well, she's got a daughter. I do. I have 2 daughters. One is a bit of a tomboy. The one who owns that is a very stereotypical little girl. It's important to say that these little boys, he was just a normal little boy. Because, if we look at biological fact, you can be a boy and you can like anything you like. You can be a girl, you can like anything you like. The gender ideologists' idea is that if you have a little girl who wants to do boy things, whatever those may be, whatever society decides those are, then actually she may actually be a boy. But backtrack, we move it back. Little Bruce was just a normal little boy. He wasn't gender non-conforming, right? But John was convinced by his idea that he could make this little boy turn into a woman just by treating him differently. And it was a perfect experience, a freaking perfect experiment because he had a twin. He had a twin. You can compare them. He was like, he's just gonna prove to everyone. Everyone's gonna revere me. I'm gonna say I'm amazing because I got it right. So I was right. So they did. So Bruce went in, had everything removed. They fashioned the skins into something that looked vaguely like a vulva. They didn't obviously put the, because that was going to happen at a later date, but they fashioned it into, And John Money would see these boys over the years, and these boys would say that he would make them do sex positions. He would make Brian, and they renamed Bruce Brenda. They would make Brian go on top of Brenda and do thrusting actions, and he would often film it. And by the way, it's important to note at this time, whilst we've been on the subject, John Money himself had no issues with paedophilia. He believed that there was a difference between paedophiles. He would call the paedophiles who abused children, these are the paedophiles that didn't gain consent, as if you can. They were sadistic paedophiles. And the kind paedophiles who got consent from the children, they were the affectionate paedophiles, right? And it's also very important to also note that amongst this one idea, and I'm not going to call it a theory because it was backed by no evidence, amongst this one idea of John's, he also had other ideas, one of which was a love map, which could say that, well, age and maturity are like sex and gender. Gender might be one thing, sex is definite, and gender's another thing. It can be anything, and maturity can be anything. Do you see where this is going? A 5-year-old might have the maturity of a 15-year-old. Now I'm going to mention something now we're on the subject of it, and I'm going to start with reading this excerpt from John Money's book, Love Maps. A love map may develop to replicate a juvenile sexual experience, but with the ages of the participants reversed. This phenomenon can be traced in the history of some paedophiles who, as boys, were themselves the younger partner in a mutual paedophilic relationship. In adolescence and adulthood, they remain sexuo-erotically boyish and are paraphilically attracted only to juveniles of the same age as their own when they became a paedophile's partner. Now, I'm going to read out this from Michel Foucault. Around these timeless gestures, these barely furtive pleasures between simple-minded adults and alert children, a whole machinery for speechifying, analysing and investigating. Between the licentious Englishman who earnestly recorded for his own purposes the singular episodes of his secret life and his contemporary, this village half-wit who would give a few pennies to the little girls for favours the older ones refused him, there was without doubt a profound connection, in any case, from one extreme to the other. Now what's important here is this theme that we keep getting of, well, the paedophile's a child in their mind. The paedophile's a child in their mind, so actually the relationship it's mutual. Because if the paedophile still has the mind stuck, the sexual mind stuck, at the age of 9, when he himself was in his mutual paedophilic relationship, well, that's what his love map is. That's what his maturity. And maybe there are some 9-year-olds who are a bit more mature, and you see where it's going. And this is a problem because this is what a lot of them are arguing now. They're not arguing it outright in public, but it's always there. It's under the lines. It's always these excuses. And you just have to look at how this is how this is becoming acceptable in mainstream. I mean, how many times do you hear people saying, well, Michael Jackson, it was okay that he was in the bed with the boys because he was a child in his head, wasn't he? No. We've got to stop saying this. We've got to stop saying this. We've got to stop excusing people for, this idea that they can do things with a child because they're a child in their head, because I'm going to show you where it leads. It leads here. 6-year-old identifies as a 5-year-old girl. This paedophile identifying as a 5-year-old girl now. You know, but this all ties into this idea that you can identify out of who you physically are. It all ties in. Back to John Money and his twins experiment. We see where it's going. Anyway, he would force, he couldn't say no to him. They said that if they did say no, he would go crazy. And they would often describe him as being like a Jekyll and Hyde. That when he was with the parents and the adults, he was very, very kind, but when he was with them, he was just nutter. He would do this, and if they didn't do as he asked, he would get very angry with them. When Brenda now got to about sort of early teens, he threatened to kill himself if they were ever made to go back to John Money again. So distressed was he. He never felt normal. He never wanted to conform to female stereotypes. He didn't want to wear dresses. He didn't want to play with dolls. He wasn't interested in any of that stuff, no matter how much they forced it on him. He didn't want to know. Because he was just a normal little lad, just a normal gender-conforming little lad who had all the brainwashed with testosterone in utero, and he just wasn't interested in these things. And by the way, boys who are interested in those things, they're also normal. It's fine. To be gender non-conforming is fine. It doesn't mean, well, we can have I do want to say that this whole gender thing was never about personal feelings. It was always about what society said, right? It was never about a child deciding what they were. Children forever have thought they were things. Whatever kids thought, almost always, 90% of the time would just grow out of it and be, and the other 90% would go on to, but the majority grew out of it. And it's important to mention that now, because all of this is based on this idea of how a child thinks of themselves. Anyway, in the end, Bruce's dad, Brenda's dad, said, listen, cards on the table, this is what's happened. You were a boy. Went crazy. What the hell? Immediately renamed himself David. Got rid of everything. They'd put him on hormones. He's, growing breasts and stuff. He'd be groomed him into, this John Money groomed him into wanting a vagina. He didn't ever want it really, a baby hole. He even showed him pictures of a woman giving birth to make him want this. Anyway, that was the end of it. He met a gentleman called Milton Diamond, and they began bringing it all back. Listen, testosterone. Eventually, they made him a phalloplasty, and he went on. I do want to make a point, whilst we're on the subject, that a lot of people in the gender ideology movement attempt to use this case of David Reimer to prove that people know who they are in their head, regardless of what they have externally. Well, that's nonsense, and I'm going to tell you why. Because we're not living in the 60s anymore. We've had an entire women's liberation movement has taken place in that time. And what that meant is in 80s, 90s, early 2000s, girls can wear whatever they like, do whatever they like whatever they like, and nobody batted an eyelid. Nobody batted an eyelid. Tomboys, they were a thing once upon a time before this transgender movement escalated everyone back into the 60s and said, well, actually, if you're not a gender-conforming boy or girl, we have to turn you into the opposite sex. And that was the whole problem here. And the irony of all of this is, had this entire experiment been done in the 80s or 90s, it probably would have worked. Because David, or Brenda, would have thought he was a girl, but living in an era where being a girl and liking all the stuff that he liked was fine, and he could have done all of that stuff and not had anything forced on him, not been forced to wear dresses. Brenda, she likes to wear the jeans, she likes to play with the trucks, she likes to play with the boys. It's fine, it would have been fine. There is no argument to be made here for the case of gender ideology or transgender children. None. Because we do not live in the 60s. We have had a whole entire women's liberation movement. If you have a daughter, she can wear what she likes. And actually, I thought we were moving in the direction of saying the same thing of boys. I really did, but it seems not. It seems that now we are back pre-women's liberation movement, and if you are not gender conforming, it seems like today we must turn them into we must change their bodies. So their bodies look like the bodies of people who want to do, who we decide, who society thinks wants to do the things that our child wants to do. However, it had failed. John Money's idea had not panned out.
Oops, oh no, what am I gonna do? This is a disaster and I don't know what to do. Oops, oh no, I haven't got a clue. This is a disaster, what am I gonna do? Oops, I've gone and mixed it up. Now I need to clear it up.
Sort it out or make it up. Fix it now or tidy up.
Oops, oh no.
Oops, oh no, no, no.
Oops, oh no.
So what John decided to do, just say it worked anyway. Tell everyone it worked. Well, what happened was, actually, because we did this after the age of 2, that's why it didn't work. And actually it would have done. So I'm just going to tell everyone it worked anyway, you know, because that was his thing. It had to be done before the age of 2. There was a window, and you had to get there before. And because they didn't, and that's the only reason it didn't work. It wasn't because his idea was utter nonsense and garbage. It was because that they missed the window. So just tell everyone it worked. And he did. Acted like it worked, and he went on to treat many people with intersex conditions, after this, and always he would make them female, and the same thing over and over and over again. And it leads towards his downfall. There was a little boy brought in who had undescended testicles and penis. They took them to took them to a physician, and you can hear it straight from the horse's mouth. He was taken to a physician, and they said, "Look, we can find out whether this is going to be a boy or a girl." They said, "We'll treat him with, we can treat this child, and with testosterone, we'll treat this child. We'll put a bit in, and if they fall down, we'll know. He just didn't get enough before, and we can put that now, and During the time between that first consultation and the next one, John Money came on the scene off his holiday. It's absolute nonsense. We'll make this into a girl. We'll make it into a girl. Rename it. They renamed this little boy, who was David, into Tabitha. Went down the John Money route. By the time they came to the next consultation with the first physician, the penis and testicles had descended, and it was a boy, renamed David. So, John was obsessed with this idea that he could turn people, and the experiments he did on people with intersex conditions was just incredible. 2004, well, before then, Brian Reimer took his life with a drugs overdose. David Reimer blew his brains out, age 38. That was the results of this experiment of John Money's. That's what happened. He had destroyed a family. He had with his crazy ideas, just destroyed a family. Crazy idea that you can turn a boy into a girl just by telling them, just by keeping on telling them. And it's really important. It's really important that we mention this, because we see now children who are being told they're, a transgender child, and some of these kids, we know around about age 6 is when people get really good memories. You can remember. Before age 6, kind of hazy. So we know that kids who are stating that they are, if they're a little girl, that they're a boy, or vice versa, before this age, they carry on down, and everyone affirms it. They're going to have very little memory of they themselves deciding that this was what they wanted. All they're going to have memories of is that this is what they kept on being told, much what David was told. He didn't know. He didn't remember age 2. That he didn't really remember ever wearing boys' clothes. All he remembered that he was a girl because everyone was telling him he was, right? And this is the problem. And here's where we bring it round, because we have now 11-year-olds being put on hormone blockers to stop their puberties. And these hormone blockers don't do nothing. This is just a pause button. It's just a pause button. And they can decide. The problem is with that pause button is during the time at which their brains would be developing and changing and hormones would be having an influence on that, nothing is changing. So the pause button, it doesn't matter. Everything is paused. Everything in the brain is paused. They're not going to change their mind on this. And we see that up to 90% of children displaying gender dysphoria will grow out of it. They will grow out of it, right? They're just, all right. Many of whom will end up being gay. Many of whom not. How many women I myself, I can't honestly say I was I thought I was a non-binary child. There you go, I'm non-binary now. I was a non-binary child. I'd have played with any toy. I didn't mind what I wore. I had no preferences for any kind of clothes. I'm happy with whatever, neutral. I was happy with that. I'll play. They can all get joined in the game. It doesn't matter. Lots of girls. My sister, very much a tomboy, very, very certain, grew out of it. Just grew out of it. So this is what we see. If left alone, these kids will just grow out of it. A small number won't, but most will. When put on the hormone blockers, however, we see almost 100% of children go on to cross-sex hormones. They will go on to, the girls will then go on to testosterone, the boys. And this is because the pause button works that puberty doesn't happen, right? So you'll get a 19-year-old man with the penis of an 11-year-old. You will get they start the cross-sex hormones around 16, but you will get, if we consider 16 as around about the point at which the majority of humans finish puberty, you've got a 16-year-old girl who's got no breasts, never started her periods, are completely out of sync with all the peers. What has been done to her is she's got more and more into this, right? And she has to be invested in this, because if this is wrong and it can't be wrong, everyone's telling her this is right. The second they go on to the cross-sex hormones, their fertility is obliterated. They will never, ever have children. Never. Impossible. The ovaries never developed. And likewise with the boys, will never, ever be able to have children. And it's even more severe with many of the boys who will want to have the surgery, because with an adult male who has the full equipment, the surgery is not straightforward, but they can use everything. They can use the full equipment to fashion the neo-vagina. With the little boys, we see with Jazz Jennings, the transgender. Jazz had to have a piece of Jazz's colon used to make the vagina, a piece of colon, because the penis didn't have enough skin. It was little tiny. At the age of 17, they did that, right? I do kind of want to make the point at this, whilst we're on the subject of Jazz Jennings. Now, this was a little boy who wanted to wear a swimming costume, right? This was a little boy who just wanted to look pretty and wear girls' things, inverted commas. In my mind, there was no reason why that child couldn't do any of those things without having to become a girl. And this is a child who has been documented in a reality series on TLC called I Am Jazz. There is a YouTube creator whose link I will put in the description called Exu Lanzik, and this lady documents what is going on with Jazz now. Jazz is, I believe, in her early 20s, suffering crippling mental health, crippling. The surgeries have failed twice, I believe. I think they're on to the third surgery now. It's failed in the most grotesque ways. I mean, in horrendous ways. What Jazz has been through is absolutely beyond belief. This was a little boy who wanted to wear a swimming costume, right? But that was not acceptable, not allowed to wear a swimming costume, have to become a little girl, can't be gender non-conforming. And none of this transition has cured any form of mental health. This was a happy little boy told, you're a girl now, who was put on hormone blockers aged 11, perfectly happy, no signs of mental health.
Jazz is on hormone blockers.
This is day one of me on the blockers.
First given as a shot.
Relax.
Then as a pump inserted into her arm.
It didn't hurt as much as I thought it would.
The medication stops testosterone from entering her body, essentially pausing her natural male development.
Now, after multiple procedures, hormone treatments, Jazz is mentally in a really bad place, and this is documented over this reality show on the channel that you can I'll put the link to. Nothing that has happened to Jazz in relation to this converting him to a girl to a woman has helped Jazz. None of it, because Jazz still suffers crippling mental health. She will never experience an orgasm because the sex organs never developed. Jazz will never have children, right? Jazz will have to put dilators, they're called. They're essentially plastic medical dildos into this neo-vagina for the rest of Jazz's life, or it will heal up. And he will have to do that. She will have to do that multiple times a day throughout Jazz's life. This is Jazz's life. Hormone treatment, possibly more surgeries, mental health treatment. The mental health it deteriorates rapidly, more and more in each series.
As you know, I have been experiencing a lot emotionally and spiritually, and I've had a lot of anxiety lately, a lot of breakdowns. I've learned that I experience emotions very deeply. I experience love and happy emotions very deeply, which is amazing, but I also experience pain and depression and anxiety and worry and fear and doubt, all of those things very deeply as well. And it could just be very crippling at times. And I've had a really hard time.
So this is the experiment. This is the David Reimer replaying, right? The David Reimer is replaying. This was a little boy who wanted to wear a swimming costume. And which brings to the question, why are 11-year-olds being able to make these decisions? Why? There's this argument, and this is this argument that we keep on hearing, that, well, they're going to commit suicide if you don't let them.
Don't be sad. I've gone to a far better place, a place where you never have to tidy your room, a place where your parents buy you new Nike trainers every week. Didn't mean to cause you any pain, Mum. But you shouldn't have made me wash.
Kevin!
Yeah, I'm dead now. Yeah.
Kevin! Tea's ready!
Well, when in history have we ever seen portions of teenage populations, where is the data to show throughout the decades? I mean, we saw the 90s, tomboys. Where is the data to show that these girls committed suicide because, the world didn't accept how they wanted to be? It doesn't exist. We have no evidence to prove that if we don't allow children at the age of 11 to stop their puberty, then go on to cross-sex hormones, we don't have any evidence to prove that will lead to them committing suicide, because they never have in the past. Kids with mental health disorders have. And by the way, the same demographic of girls is going down this transgender route as we saw anorexia and all the rest of it. There's a fantastic book by Abigail Schreier, which I'll put in the link, that goes through everything. There's no point in me rehashing it now. My point of this all is, if your child is mature enough, remember age and maturity, a love map. If your child is old enough to consent to lifelong infertility, consent to major bodily changes, well, why can't they consent to having sex with an adult? It's their body. It's their body.
A child is able to recognise a pleasurable experience. He is able to recognise a pleasing emotional experience. He is able to express consent and to recognise that this is something he wishes to continue.
Where are we, Tiny Human?
We are at the doctor's.
Why are we at the doctor's?
We are getting I am getting the blockers shot.
Yeah, it's your first one.
Yep.
Excited?
Yes and no. I don't like shots. But I do like blockers.
He's able to express consent and to recognise that this is something he wishes to continue. He's able to express consent.
And if they want to do stuff, if they want to do these things, you don't have to know about it. Nicola, 4-year-olds, we won't tell your mummy and daddy. That's grooming. Can you see that? Can you see how this ties in to each other? Can you see how this entire agenda, they're loving it. I mean, the paedophiles are waiting now. They are. It's our chance again now. This is our chance again, because the arguments can now be made for children can consent. They can consent. An 11-year-old can. We've been saying it for years. They know their bodies. We've been saying it, haven't we? Haven't we? We've all been saying it. We were saying it in the 60s, but nobody believed us. We said it again in the 80s. Nobody believed us. They've got to believe us now, because they're letting kids change their bodies, and they don't even have to tell the parents. So what if they want to have sex with us? You know, what if we're kind to them? We're really nice paedophiles. We love children. We might meet one in a forum online, you know, and we might meet one and we might start talking to one. And if they want to, you know, be with us, you know, what's the problem? They're old enough. They know their bodies. They know what's best for them. It's not up to their parents. You know, their parents should be shut out. The schools aren't telling them if they want to change their gender. Can you see? Can you see the big picture here of what's gone on? 60s, 70s, 80s. Now. They've never stopped. They've never stopped trying to make this happen, right? And I reiterate, transgender people, like gay people back in the 70s, 80s, like heterosexual people back in the 60s, aren't paedophiles. The heterosexual people, the gay people, none of these people are paedophiles. But with every movement, the paedophiles rise up and look for their opportunity too. And they use all the arguments that these movements use, the sexual liberation arguments, and they use them themselves. They say, well, you know, their kids can enjoy. These people think, listen, you know, when we hear Alan, right, it's so important to understand this, because when we hear people like Alan and people like John Money talking about affectionate paedophiles, sadistic, right, these people believe that consent with children is a thing. They believe that children can consent to this stuff, right? In much the way a woman can consent to sex, yes or no? Well, a woman can be raped, a child can be raped, but if the woman says yes, if the child says yes, it's not rape anymore, it's consensual sex. They think that children consent. They think that children can enjoy this. They think that people like us are holding children back, that children can be sexual, and the only reason they're not is because we're holding them back. They've always believed this, right? 2015, we see transgenderism gaining traction. 14-15, we see the Q added to the LGBTQ. Now, what is it then, right? Challenging society's perception of what's acceptable. We challenged it in the 60s, and heterosexual people started going at it like rabbits. We challenged it in the 70s and 80s. Same-sex people, out of the wood. We can go with each other now. No fears, right? Covered by the flag. So what's left? What is left after that? What is left after consensual sex with other adults? Unconsensual sex, inconsensual sex. What else have we got to challenge? Judith? Judith knows. Judith knows. The Q, you know, in my opinion, because I can't see how this can mean anything else. The Q covers the P. The Q covers the P. The Q covers the bestiality. The Q covers now. Everything else is already covered, so the Q must cover all the things that are still unacceptable. This is queer theory. The things that society, the norms that society needs to challenge, one of which is paedophilia. And when you begin to unravel the whole entire freaking thing, as I have tried so hard to do for you on this video today, and we're not even there, because we haven't even got to part 2 yet, because we're going to find out who's steering this, how this has all happened, right? We get to the point where we realise that what's been asked of us, so this Q enters in 2015, why? What's it there for? Well, to challenge all those things, the paedophiles. And we see them popping up. Up comes Alan with her book. The paedophiles, the poor little paedophiles. Ooh, let's not call them paedophiles anymore because it might upset them. Minor attracted person. Minor attracted person. You know, you think that's more acceptable? They have this thing. They have this thing that we, you know, like I said, the child abuse. No. No, Alan and anyone else in queer theory. We don't just think the act is abhorrent. We think just thinking about the act, just thinking about a child in a sexual way is abhorrent, right? Now, I get it. I get what you're saying. These people have got these feelings, whatever, they can't help it, right? They can't help it. Do not try and spin us this nonsense and tell us that we think they're bad people because we conflate paedophilia with child molestation. No, we conflate paedophilia with MAP. These are people who want to have sex with children. These are people who have sexual thoughts about children. Regardless of whether they ever act on them, it's disgusting. And up you've come again. Up you have risen. And up you are coming to challenge society to decide whether this is acceptable or not. Right? And we're back. And we're now allowing children to consent to things. Allowing it. We're not going to tell the parents. What is this? Right? What is this exactly? Because I think it really needs to be understood here that they're doing it again. They have done this before and they're doing it again. And they're using this agenda to bring themselves forward. Well, it's the transsexual, transgender people's turn this time round. Maybe we can come back. Maybe we can. I hope not. You decide. You decide. They want us to have a conversation about it. They've put the Q in there now. Paedophiles are in the rainbow now. They're in it. I can't see how they're not. Am I wrong in that? How are they not in it? You know what queer theory is? They're already in, aren't they, now? You know, you crept in the back door when no one was looking. This time round, we're in queer theory. Why? Now we come here because, as I said, you know, why now? Why now? Because we know that the first 2 times around, the heterosexual 1960s, we know that it wasn't acceptable for heterosexual people to just have sex with anyone, that we weren't sexually liberated. We know in the 80s it wasn't acceptable for gay people, and, you know, but I don't know of a time when it hasn't been acceptable to present a man to say he's trapped in the body of a woman. I don't know of a time when that hasn't been acceptable. As far as I was aware, that was acceptable. Transsexual people have been going decades and treated, you know, treated with kindness For the most part, people have felt sorry for these, it was predominantly men, people have felt sorry for these men. Like, oh my God, can you imagine trapped in a woman's body? Oh, who'd want that? These poor people, we need to show them compassion. You know, they've been using female facilities. I mean, this is before, of course they've had the operation. You know, it's practical, isn't it? It's never been, my point is, whether it was a problem or not is another story. Nobody ever made a fuss about it before. Not before now. So, why? Why and how? Why and how? And that's what I'm going to talk about next.